Chapter 6, Part 1 of The Uttermost Farthing. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. The Uttermost Farthing by R. Austin Freeman. Chapter 6, The Trail of the Serpent. Part 1. Hitherto, in my transcriptions from Humphrey Challoner's Museum Archives, I have taken the entries in their order, omitting only such technical details as might seem unsuitable for the lay reader. Now, however, I pass over a number of entries. The capture of numbers 7, 8, and 9 exhibit the methods to which Challoner, in the main, adhered during his long residence in East London; and, though there were occasional variations, the accounts of the captures present a general similarity which might render their recitals tedious. The last entry but one, on the other hand, is among the most curious and interesting. Apart from the stirring incidents that it records, the new light that it throws on a hitherto unsolved mystery makes it worth exacting entire, which I now proceed to do, with the necessary omissions alluded to above. Circumstances connected with the acquirement of numbers 23 and 24 in the anthropological series. The sand of my life ran out with varying speed, as it seemed to me, in the little barber's shop in Saul Street, Whitechapel. Now would my pulses beat and the current of my blood run swift. Those were the times when I had visitors, and presently a new skeleton or two would make their appearance in the long wall-case. But there were long intervals of sordid labor and dull inaction, when I would cut hair and examine it through my lens, day after day, and wonder whether, in electing to live rather than pass voluntarily into eternal repose, I had, after all, chosen the better part. For in all those years no customer with ringed hair ever came to my shop. The long pursuit seemed to bring me no nearer to that unknown wretch, the slayer of my beloved wife. Still was he hidden from me amidst the unclean multitude that seethed around. Or perchance some sordid grave had already offered him an everlasting sanctuary, leaving me weary to pursue a phantom enemy. But I am digressing. This is not a record of my emotions, but a history of the contents of my museum. Let me proceed to specimens 23 and 24, and the very remarkable circumstances under which I had the good fortune to acquire them. First, however, I must describe an incident which, although it occurred some time before, never developed its importance until this occasion arose. One drowsy afternoon there came to my shop a smallish, shabby-looking man, quiet and civil in manner, and particularly wooden as to his countenance. In short, a typical old lag. I recognized the type at a glance. The penal servitude face had become a familiar phenomenon. He spread himself out to be shaved, and to have the severely official style of his coiffure replaced by a less distinctive mode. And as I worked he conversed affably. "Saw old Polensky a week or two ago." "Did you indeed?" said I. "Yus. Portland. Got into 'ot water too, he did. Tried to fetch the farm and didn't pull it off." The farm, I may explain, is the prison infirmary. "Got dropped on for malingering. That's the way with these bloomin' foreigners." "He didn't impose on the doctor, then?" "Lor, no. Doctor'd seen that sort of bloke before. Polensky said he'd got a pain in his stomach, so the doctor says it must be because his diet was too rich, and knocks off 'arf his grub. I tell yer, Polensky was sorry he'd spoke." Here, my client showing a disposition to smile, I removed the razor to allow him to do so. Presently he resumed, discursively. "I knew this 'ouse years ago, before Polensky's time, when old Durdler had it. Durdler used to do the smashing lay-up on the second floor, and me and 2 or 3 nippers used to work for him, plantin' the snide, you know. 'E was a rare Lyrian, was Durdler. It was 'im what made that slidin' door in the wall in the second floor front." I picked up my ears at this. "A sliding door? In this house?" "Goblimey!" exclaimed my client. "Mean ter say you don't know about that door?" I assured him most positively that I had never heard of it. "Well, well," he muttered. "Sich a useful thing, too. Durdler used to keep his moulds and stuff up there, and then, when there was a scare of the cops, he used to pop the thing through into the next 'ouse. Mrs. Jacob had a room next door, and the coppers used to come and sniff around, but of course there wasn't nothing to see. Reg'lar suck-in for them. And it was useful if you was follered. You could mizzle in through the shop, run upstairs, pop through the door, downstairs next door, and out through the backyard. I've done it myself. Who's got the second floor front now?" "I have," said I. "I kept the whole of the house." "My eye!" exclaimed my friend, whose name I learned to be Towler. "You are bloomin' toff. Like me to show you that door?" I said that I should like it very much, and accordingly, when the trimming operations were concluded and I had secured a wisp of Mr. Trawler's hair for subsequent examination, we ascended to the second floor front, and he demonstrated the hidden door. "It's in this 'ere cupboard, under that row of pegs. That peg underneath at the side is the 'andle. You catches 'old of it, so, and you gives it a pull to the right." He suited the action to the words, and, with a loud groan, the middle third of the back of the cupboard slid bodily to the right, leaving an opening about 3 feet square, beyond which was a solid-looking panel with a small knob at the left-hand side. "That," whispered Towler, "is the back of a cupboard in the next 'ouse. If you was to pull that 'andle to the right, it would slide along same as this one, only I expect there's somebody in the room there." I rewarded Mr. Towler with a half-sovereign, which he evidently thought liberal, and he departed gleefully. Shortly afterwards I learned that he had "got a stretch" in connection with a "job" at Camberwell, and he vanished from my ken. But I did not forget the sliding doors. No special use for them suggested itself, but their potentialities were so obvious that I resolved to keep a sharp eye on the second floor front next door. I had not long to wait. Presently the whole floor was advertised by a card on the street door as being to let, and I seized the opportunity of a quiet Sunday to reconnoitre and put the arrangements in going order. I slid back the panel on my side and then, dragging at the handle, pushed back the second panel. Both moved noisily and would require careful treatment. I passed through the second opening into the vacant room and looked around, but there was little to see, though a good deal to smell, for the windows were hermetically sealed and a closed stove fitted into the fireplace to preclude any possibility of ventilation. The aroma of the late tenants still lingered in the air. I returned through the opening and began my labours. First, with a hard brush, I cleaned out both sets of grooves, top and bottom. Then, into each groove I painted a thick coating of tallow and black lead, mixed into a paste and heated. By moving the panels backwards and forwards a great number of times, I distributed the lubricant and brought the black lead to such a polish that the door slid with the greatest ease and without a sound. I was so pleased with the result that I was tempted to engage the room next door, but as this might have aroused suspicion, seeing that I had a whole house already, I refrained, and shortly afterwards the floor was taken by a family of Polish Jews, who apparently supplemented their income by letting a part of it furnished. I now pass over an intervening period and come to the circumstances of one of my most interesting and stirring experiences. It was about this time that some misbegotten mechanician invented the automatic magazine pistol, and thereby rendered possible a new and execrable type of criminal. It was not long before the appropriate criminal arrived. The scene of the first appearance was in the suburb of Tottenham, where 2 Russian Poles attempted, and failed in, an idiotic street robbery. The attempt was made in broad daylight in the open street, and the 2 wretches, having failed, ran away, shooting at every human being they met. In the end they were both killed, one by his own hand, but not until they had murdered a gallant constable and a poor little child, and injured in all 22 persons. I read the newspaper account with deep interest and the conviction that this was only a beginning. These 2 frenzied degenerates belonged to a common enough type, the type of the Slav criminal, who has not sense enough to take precautions nor courage enough to abide the fortune of war. The automatic pistol, I felt sure, would bring him into view, and I was not mistaken. One night, returning from a tour of inspection, I met a small excited crowd accompanying a procession of 3 police ambulances. I joined the throng and presently turned into a small blind thoroughfare, in which had gathered a small and nervous-looking crowd and a few flurried policemen. Several of the windows were shattered, and on the ground were 3 prostrate figures. One was dead, the others were badly wounded, and all 3 were members of the police force. I watched the ambulances depart with their melancholy burdens, and then turned for information to a bystander. He had not much to give, but the substance of his account, confirmed later by the newspapers, was this. The police had located a gang of suspected burglars, and 3 officers had come to the house to make arrests. They had knocked at the door, which, after some delay, was opened. Some person within had immediately shot one of the officers dead, and the entire gang of 4 or 5 had rushed out, fired point-blank at the other 2 officers, and then raced up the street shooting right and left like madmen. Several people had been wounded and, grievous to relate, The whole gang of miscreants had made their escape into the surrounding slums. I was profoundly interested and even excited for several reasons. In the first place, here at last was the real Lombroso criminal, the subhuman matoid, devoid of intelligence, devoid of the faintest glimmering of a moral sense, fit for nothing but the lethal chamber, compared with whom the British habitual was a civilized gentleman. Without a specimen or two of this type my collection was incomplete. Then there was the evident applicability of my methods to this class of offender, methods of quiet extermination without fuss, public disorder, or risk to the precious lives of the police. But beyond these there was another reason for my interest. The murder of my wife had been a purposeless, unnecessary crime, committed by some wretch to whom human life was a thing of no consideration. There was an analogy in the circumstances that seemed to connect that murder with this type of miscreant. It was even possible that one of these villains might be the one whom I had so patiently sought through the long and weary years. The thought fired me with new enthusiasm. Forthwith I started to pursue the possible course of the fugitives, threading countless by-streets and alleys, peering into squalid courts, and sending many a doubtful-looking loiterer shuffling hastily round the nearest corner. Of course it was fruitless. I had no clue and did not even know the men. I was merely walking off my own excitement. Nevertheless, every night as soon as I had closed my shop, I set forth on a voyage of exploration, impelled by sheer restlessness, and during the day I listened eagerly to the talk of my customers in Yiddish, a language of which I was supposed to be entirely ignorant. But I learned nothing. Either the fugitives were unknown, or the natural secretiveness of an alien people forbade any reference to them, even among themselves. And meanwhile, as I have said, I tramped the streets nightly into the small hours of the morning. Returning from one of these expeditions a little earlier than usual, I found a small party of policemen and a sprinkling of idlers gathered opposite the house next door. There was no need to ask what was doing. The suppressed excitement of the officers and the service revolvers in their belts told the story. There was going to be another slaughter, and I was probably too late for any but a spectator's part. The street door was open, and the house was being quietly emptied of its human occupants. They came out one by one, shivering and complaining, with little bundles of their possessions hastily snatched up, and collected in a miserable group on the pavement. I opened my shop door and invited them to come in and rest while their messengers went to look for a harbor of refuge, but I stayed outside to see the upshot of the proceedings. When the last of the tenants had come out, a sergeant emerged and quietly closed the street door with a latch-key. The rest of the policemen took up sheltered positions in doorways after warning the idlers to disperse, and the sergeant turned to me. "Now, Mr. Vosper, you'd better keep your nose indoors if you don't want it shot off. There's going to be trouble presently." He pushed me gently into the shop and shut the door after me. I found the evicted tenants chattering excitedly and very unhappy. But they were not rebellious. They were mostly Jews, and Jews are a patient, submissive people. I boiled some water in my little copper, which they drank gratefully, out of shaving mugs, my outfit of crockery being otherwise rather limited. And meanwhile they talked volubly, and I listened. "I wonder," said a stout, elderly Jewess, "how der police know those gentlemens got to lodge mit me. Somebody must have told them." "Yus," agreed an evicted tenant of doubtful occupation. "Some bloomin' nark is givin' 'em away. Good job, too. 'Tain't playin' the game for to go pottin' at coppers like that there. Coppers has got their job to do same's as we have. You know that, Mrs. Kaminsky." "Ja, dat is true," said the Jewess. "But they might let me bring my things mit me. Tomorrow is Kai Fox Day. Now I lose my money." "How is that, Mrs. Kosminski?" I asked. "Because I seldom not de things I buy for Kai Fox Day. De fireworks, de grangers, de mags, and oder things for de childrens. 25 shillings fort I buy. They are in my room on de second floor. I ask de police to let me fetch them. Hot they say no. I shall disturb de gentlemens in de front room. So I lose my money because I sell dem not." Here the unfortunate woman burst into tears, and I was so much affected by her distress that I instantly offered to buy the whole consignment for £2, whereat she wept more copiously than ever, but collected the purchase money with great promptitude and stowed it away in a very internal pocket, displaying in the process as many layers of clothing as an old-fashioned pen-wiper. "Ach, Mr. Vosper, you are so good to all de poor peoples, though you are only a poor man yourself. But it is de poor, but is de friends of de poor. and in her gratitude she would have kissed my hands if I had not prudently stuck them into my trouser pockets. A messenger now arrived to say that a refuge had been secured for the night, and my guests departed with many thanks and benedictions. The street, as I looked out, was now quite deserted save for one or two prowling policemen who, apparently, bored with their hiding-places, had come forth to patrol in the open. I did not stay to watch them, for Mrs. Kosminski's remarks had started a train of thought which required to be carried out quickly. Accordingly, I went in and fell to pacing the empty shop. The police, I assumed, were waiting for daylight to rush the house. It was a mad plan, and yet I was convinced that they had no other. And when they should enter, in the face of a stream of bullets from those terrible automatic pistols, what a carnage there would be! It was frightful to think of. Why does the law permit those cowards' tools to be made and sold? A pistol is the one weapon that has no legitimate use. An axe, a knife, even a rifle has some lawful function, but a pistol is an appliance for killing human beings. It has no other purpose whatever. A man who is found with housebreaking tools in his possession is assumed to be a housebreaker. Surely a man who carries a pistol convicts himself of the intention to kill somebody. But perhaps the police had some reasonable plan. It was possible, but it was very unlikely. The British policeman is a grand fellow, brave as a lion and ready to march cheerfully into the mouth of hell if duty calls. But he knows no tactics. His very courage is almost a disadvantage, leading him to disdain reasonable caution. I felt that our guardians were again going to sacrifice themselves to these vermin. It was terrible. It was a wicked waste of precious lives. Could nothing be done to prevent it? According to Mrs. Kosminski, the gentlemans were in the second-floor front, the room with the sliding panel. Then I could, at least, keep a watch on them. I walked slowly upstairs, gnashing my teeth with irritation. The sacrifice was so unnecessary. I could think, off-hand, of half a dozen ways of annihilating those wretches without risking a single hair of any decent person's head. And here were the police, with all the resources of science at their disposal, and practically unlimited time in which to work, actually contemplating a fight with the odds against them. I stole into the second-floor front and, by the light of a match, found the cupboard. The inside panel, as I will call the one on my side, slid back without a sound. There was now only the second panel between me and the next room. I could plainly hear the murmur of voices and sounds of movement, but I could not distinguish what was being said, and as this was of some importance, I determined to try the other panel. Grasping the handle, I gave a firm but gradual pull, and felt the panel slide back quite silently for a couple of inches. Instantly the voices became perfectly distinct, and a whiff of foul, stuffy air came through, with a faint glimmer of light, by which I knew that the cupboard on their side was at least partly open. "I tell you, Piragoff," said a voice in Russian, "you are nervous about nothing. The police are looking for us, but they know none of us by sight. We can go about quite safely." "I'm not so sure," replied another voice, presumably Piragoff's. "The babbling fool who let us the house may talk more, and who knows but some of our own people may betray us. That woman Kosminski looked very queerly at us, I thought." "Bah!" exclaimed the other. "Come and lie down, Piragoff. Tomorrow we will leave this place and separate. We shall go away for a time, and they will forget us. Put some more coke in the stove and let us go to sleep." How incalculable are the groupings of factors that evolve the causation of events! Those last words of the invisible ruffian seemed quite trivial and inconsequent, and yet they framed his death warrant. I did not myself realize it fully at the moment. As I closed the slide and stepped back, I was conscious only that a useful train of thought had been started. Put some more coke in the stove and let us go to sleep. Yes, there was a clear connection between the idea of stove and that of sleep, a sleep of infinite duration. Therein lay the solution of the problem. I walked slowly down the stairs, tracing the connection between the ideas of stove and sleep. The nauseous air that had filtered through from that room spoke eloquently of sealed windows and stopped crevices. It was a frosty night, and the murderers were chilly. A back draught in the stovepipe would fill the room with poisonous gases and probably suffocate those wretches slowly and quietly. But how was it to be brought about? For a moment I thought of climbing to the roof and stopping the chimney from above, but the plan was a bad one. The police might see me and make some regrettable mistake with a revolver. Besides, it would probably fail. The stoppage of the draught would extinguish the fire, and the pungent coke fumes would warn the villains of their danger. Still closely pursuing the train of thought, I stepped into my bedroom and lit the gas. I turned to glance around the room, and behold, the problem was solved. In the fireplace stood a small brass stove of Russian make, a tiny affair, too small to burn anything but charcoal, but, as charcoal was easily obtainable in East London, I had bought it and fixed it myself. It was perfectly safe in a well-ventilated room, though otherwise very dangerous, for fumes of charcoal, consisting of nearly pure carbon dioxide, being practically inodorous, give no warning. My course was now quite clear. The stove was fitted with asbestos-covered handles, a box of charcoal stood by the hearth, and in the corner was an extra length of stovepipe for which I had had no use. But I had a use for it now. I lit the charcoal in the stove and, while it was burning up, carried the stovepipe and the box of fuel upstairs. Then I returned for the stove, inside which the charcoal was now beginning to glow brightly. I fixed on the extra length of pipe and, with my hand, felt the stream of hot air, or rather hot carbon dioxide gas, pouring out of its mouth. I tried the pipe against the opening and found that it would rest comfortably on the lower edge, and then, very slowly and cautiously, I drew back the sliding panel about 6 inches. The ruffians were still wrangling on the same subject, for I heard one exclaim, "Don't be a fool, Piragoff. You'll only attract attention if you go nosing about downstairs." "I don't care," was the answer. "I feel uneasy. I must go down and see if all is quiet before I go to sleep." Here the sound of the opening and shutting of the door put an end to the discussion, save for a torrent of curses and maledictions from the 2 remaining men. But in a few moments the door opened noisily and Piragoff shouted, "Come out! Come out! The house is empty! We are betrayed!" A howl of dismay was the answer. The 2 wretches burst into a grotesque mixture of weeping and cursing, and I heard them literally dancing about the room in the ecstasy of their terror. "Come out!" repeated Piragoff. "We will kill them all. We will shoot those pigs, every one of them. Some of us shall get away. Come!" "It's of no use, Piragoff," whimpered one of his comrades. "They are in the house. It is an ambush." "Yes," cried the third man. "It is as Boris says. The house is dark and they are hiding in it. Bolt the door and let them come to us, and we will kill them. Kill! Kill! Kill!" He ended with an unearthly shriek and a burst of hysterical sobs. "I shall go," said Piragoff. "There's a chance." "There is none," shrieked the other. "Come back, madman!" The door slammed, the key turned in the lock, and a heavy bolt was shot. I quietly closed the slide and ran down to the open window of the first-floor front room. The street appeared to be empty save for 2 constables who stood at a corner conversing in low tones. A profound silence reigned, an unusual silence, it seemed, through which the subdued murmur of the constables' voices was faintly audible. I looked out anxiously, debating whether I ought not to warn the unconscious sentinels, even at the risk of defeating my plans. Suddenly 2 sharp reports in quick succession rang out from below. Both constables fell, and a figure darted out of the doorway and raced madly up the street. One of the fallen constables lay motionless. The other grasped his hip with one hand, and with the other fired his revolver repeatedly at the retreating murderer, but apparently missed him every time. In a few seconds a sergeant and another constable came flying round the corner. Police whistles began to sound their warning in all directions, and the previous silence gave place to a very babel of noise. But Piragoff had shot up a side turning before the sergeant arrived, and the persistent clamor of the whistles told me that he had, for the moment at least, escaped. I turned away. Piragoff was out of my hands, and what I had seen only made it more imperative that I should prevent further bloodshed. As, once more, I softly opened the slide, the voices of the miserable wretches within came to me in a strange and unpleasant mixture of curses, blasphemies, and hysterical sobs. They cursed Piragoff. They cursed the police. They invoked death and destruction on every man, woman, and child in this nation of pigs, and between the curses they wept and lamented. I had shut the damper of the stove before going down, but the charcoal was still alight, though dull. I now arranged the stove in position, resting the long pipe on the bottom edge of the opening, so that its end projected a few inches into the room, moving quite silently, and assisted by the hubbub from without, and the noise produced by the 2 craven villains. When it was fixed, I opened the damper, and presently, holding my hand opposite the mouth of the pipe, felt a strong current of hot gas pouring out. That gas would cool rapidly on meeting the cold air, and would then fall by its own weight and collect about the floor. My apparatus was now in full going order, and there was nothing for it but to wait. The noise in the street had subsided, but the two ruffians showed no signs of settling down. They were now engaged in barricading the door so that it could be forced open only a few inches, thus exposing the attackers to a deadly fire. I was much obliged to them. Their movements would help to diffuse the gas and prevent it from settling too densely on the floor. Also, their exertions would make them breathe more deeply and so come more rapidly under the influence of the poison. The time crept on. The police made no sign. The murderers rested from their labors, sometimes talking excitedly, sometimes silent for a few minutes at a time, and at intervals yawning like overstrung women. And all the time the invisible stream of heavy, deadly gas was pouring out of the stovepipe and trickling unseen along the floor. Even now it must be eddying about the murderers' feet and slowly diffusing upwards. If only the police would remain quiescent for an hour or two more, the danger would be over. The long hours of the winter's night dragged out their weary length, yet not weary to me, for, as I kept my vigil by the pipe and fed the stove silently at intervals, I was on the very tiptoe of expectation. Every moment I dreaded to hear the disastrous crash on the door that should herald a fresh slaughter, and, as the minutes passed and all remained still, hope rose higher and higher. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of my quarry through the chink of their cupboard door, for I had opened the slide fully a foot, finding that the clothes that hung from the pegs would screen me, even if the darkness on my side had not done so already. So I saw one of them sit down on a low chair and couch, shuddering, over the coke stove, while the other restlessly paced the room. And still the stream of deadly gas trickled unceasingly from the pipe. Presently the former rose and yawned heavily. "Bah!" he growled. "I am tired. I shall lie down. If I fall asleep, Boris, do you watch and wake me if you hear them coming." By craning my neck through the opening I could just continue to get a glimpse of him as he threw himself on a mattress that was spread on the floor. The other man continued for a while to pace the room. Then he sat down on the chair and spread his hands out over the stove, muttering to himself. I watched him as well as I could through the chink of the cupboard doors, by the dim light of the stinking paraffin lamp, a greasy, unwholesome-looking wretch, sallow, pallid, and unshorn, and thought how striking he would look in the form of a reduced, dry preparation. But that was impossible. I was now working only for the police. Regrettable as it was, I should have to surrender these two specimens to the coroner and the gravedigger. A deplorable waste of material, but unavoidable, even if one of them should prove to be my long-sought enemy. At this thought I started, and at that moment the man on the mattress gave a strange, snorting cry. The ruffian, Boris, looked round, rose, went over to the mattress and stirred the other with his foot. "Louis! Louis!" he cried angrily. "What the devil are you making that noise for?" The other man scrambled up with a cry of terror, pistol in hand. "Ah, it is you, Boris. I was dreaming. I thought they had come." He sat down again on the mattress and yawned. "Bah, I am sleepy. I must lie down again. Watch a little longer, Boris." "Why should I watch?" demanded Boris. "They will make enough noise opening the door. I shall lie down a little too." He flung himself down beside his comrade, but in a minute or two started up, taking deep breaths. "My God!" he exclaimed. "I can't breathe lying down. I feel as if I should choke. And you too, Louis. You are snorting like a pig. Get up, man." He shook the prostrate man roughly, but eliciting only a few drowsy curses, resumed his restless pacing of the room. But not for long. Yawn after yawn told me that the gas was already in his blood, and the loud snoring of the other man indicated plainly the state of the air in the lower part of the room. Presently Boris halted in his walk and sat down by the stove, muttering as before. Soon he began to nod. Then he nearly fell forward on the stove. Finally he rose heavily, staggered across to the mattress, and once more flung himself down. End of chapter 6, part 1.